All right, welcome everyone to the Portland Utility Board. Under Portland City law and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and the public will have an opportunity to provide comments during public comment portion of our agenda. And you can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB's beliefs, values, and anti-racist principles. PUB believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with PUB. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted towards people that have been made vulnerable by systemic inequities. And this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. And so how we do this is we speak up and we speak out. Each person is empowered to maintain the culture of this Portland Utility Board, and we will focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, not the person.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Archer-Masters, and I'll quickly run through the meeting guidelines. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, the name of the person you're addressing, or if you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by myself, PUB staff, so please limit any chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. I may lower your hand once you've begun speaking just to maintain the flow of conversation. During public comment periods, the public can raise their hands and you'll be called on when appropriate. If connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos can be turned on when speaking if desired. It's not required. Please mute your microphone when not speaking, and members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. If you're connecting by phone, press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. As mentioned, the public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with myself or raise your hand during that period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. I'll pass it back to you, Robin, for the agenda.
Of course. And on today's agenda, our main topic will be focusing on an update to the Natural Resources Service Delivery Assessment. And then that should be followed with some Q&A, time for PUB members to offer their input as well as ask some important questions as we navigate this part of charter reform. And so with that, are there any disclosures of communications? Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, on behalf of Lema Riverkeeper, I've started making the rounds, talking with city commissioners and their staff about most really staff at this point about the charter reform and the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Thank you for that disclosure. Are there any other PUB members that need to disclose anything before we start? Not seeing any hand raises, so we can move on. Has there been any requests for public comment before or currently during the meeting?
This is Amy, and I've not received any in advance, and so far no chat. So if you're in the room, please raise your hand if you want to give public comment.
All right, I'm not seeing any hand raises, so we can move on to reviewing and approving the draft minutes from the July meeting. PUB members, take a moment Please raise your hand if there's anything that needs to be edited from last month's minutes. All right, seeing no hand raises, the minutes are accepted as they are. And so we can move on to our topic of the day. And yeah, give me just a second. There we go. So yeah, I just want, we have city staff here, and we're gonna have a brief update by the Bureau of Environmental Services Director, Dawn Uchiyamas. And so we're going to hear from Bureau staff just more information about this natural resources service delivery assessment. And that's going to be followed up with some Q&A from Pub. And yeah, just to help us welcome Dawn and the BES staff. So welcome to Pub.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dawn Uchiyamas, and I'm the Director of the Bureau of Environmental Services. And on behalf of the project team, I'm really pleased to join you this afternoon to introduce the Natural Resources Service Delivery Assessment work, which addresses the environment and climate section of the City Charter Reform Resolution 36709. That resolution directed Portland Parks and Recreation and the Bureau of Environmental Services to develop a work plan for integrating natural resource service delivery in concert with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, the Portland Water Bureau, and the Portland Bureau of Transportation. So we have 5 bureaus involved in this work. Some very thoughtful and deliberate work has been done to get us to this point, to get us our thoughts organized and to get us kind of looking in the same direction. And we've been very, very fortunate to have the support of some really fabulous consultants, including Chris Wallace-Caldwell from Catalysis, who's going to lead us through the presentation today. And there will be, as Robin noted, an opportunity for questions and answers, and also some follow-up survey work that we're going to ask you to participate in. So please see today as the beginning of a conversation of us reporting on the kind of early organizing that we did, and that we are really excited to share this with you and are really looking forward to your feedback. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
I think I'll take a beat before I share our slides. So I just wanted to also introduce my colleague, Jamila Dozier. She's the principal consultant from New Theory Consulting, and she and I have been working as support and facilitation support. So what we're going to do is describe a little bit about the process to date. This is the high level. I may just show again what Dawn was just reading as far as the city resolution, so we can have that. And then we'll stop for a brief Q&A about that high level piece. And then we'll be turning it over to Becky Steckler from Eco Northwest. She's the project manager from there, and she'll be guiding you through the assessment that her team did as well. So while we are the consultants talking, I would say the work here that we're presenting is really the work of all 5 bureaus, the bureau directors and the subject matter experts who were active parts of this process. So with that, I will share my screen and we'll take a look here. So hold on just a moment. Okay, so our promise to you is that we will leave time for Q&A. And we're going to divide that, as I said, into 2 sections. So first we'll talk about the project and process overview, and we'll do a shorter Q&A for that. And then we'll go into the City of Portland Natural Resources Delivery Assessment Inventory that Becky's going to lead through. We'll have a bulk of our Q&A during that time. As Dawn mentioned, I'm not going to reread this, but this is all in response to City Resolution 37609. And so our work has been this spring is to gather the bureaus together to really dig into what does this mean, how to establish a vision for this process, and develop a real solid understanding of the problems that might be addressed by it and the opportunities created. So the first thing I'll spend a little bit of time is just describing the process that we took, and then I'll turn it over to Jamila to go through what were some of the outcomes of that process. So we knew that in facilitating these conversations, these are real people involved. These are not the bureaus all are made up of people who have various expertise, and bringing those folks together into the same room to have very deep and meaningful conversations was really critical to this. We kicked off the process with an advanced survey to the bureau directors to weigh in on some of their hopes for the process itself. That really gave us some guidance on what we needed to pay attention to and helped us design a workshop that was going to be effective at uncovering the conversations that needed to happen. We also then held 2 different workshops with, as I mentioned, the 5 different bureau directors and the subject matter experts contributing to that, and starting to dig into what are the problems that are that can be addressed by the city resolution, what is within scope and what perhaps is out of scope of that work, and then getting into what are some of the blue sky scenarios, the real opportunities that are created at this moment in time. I wanted to share with you, just before we move on to that, that probably one of the most important things that happened at this workshop was we took the group through at the end identifying what do they need from this process as we go through it together as multiple bureaus, not a single bureau leading this, and what do they offer each other. And so just to give you a little sense of that, what we were impressed by was hearing, people identifying that they need clarity of the process. So we kept that very clear, transparency with each other, continued openness, and a collective ideal that this is a huge opportunity to address some issues and actually create substantially better outcomes for the city. Folks then identified what they offer each other, and that is collaboration, to be open to new ways of doing things, inspiration, trust, direct conversation, and keeping an open door with each other. And so we think that workshop was very successful in having that balanced approach with all of the bureaus. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamila, who's going to describe some of the outcomes that came out of those 2 sessions.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. So as part of our time together, we had a few groups begin to do a visioning process. As you can see here, we have a lot of trees with strong foundations. And so we asked them to answer the following question in doing this process. And that question was, what does an integrated natural resource delivery model look like for Portland, for our employees, and for the public? Some of the high-level content that came out of this process was we have a real chance to stop tweaking around the margins and use this moment to create a system that provides world-class community service and resources to protect our natural areas, invest in our communities, and ultimately meet our city and community goals. Something else that came from this vision process was that we will have accurate information, inventory, and maintenance ownership related to natural resources and appropriate funding, planning, and resourcing. And lastly, this will allow us to boldly and comprehensively strengthen and grow our systems of green and blue infrastructure, improve the quality of life, all life in Portland, and elevate the city's climate mitigation and resilience actions. We also spent some time identifying some of the problems that are in front of us as we think about this unified delivery system. And as we identify the problem, we wanted to also identify some opportunities to address these problems. So our first problem is that there's unclear ownership and distribution of responsibilities. So the opportunity here is to emphasize shared goals while refining clarity of scope, purview, and coordination between bureaus. The next problem that was identified was that their inefficiencies and redundancies are present in current processes in resource management. And the opportunity there is to efficiently allocate and manage resources and funding in service of protecting natural areas. Our third problem identified was the public has difficulty understanding and navigating natural resource systems. So the opportunity here is to create cohesive framing and vocabulary across departments to increase navigability and access. And the fourth problem that was identified was that there's no clear route for identifying and integrating community needs and expectations. So the opportunity here is to explore methods to identify community needs to provide Portland with functional, healthy, natural resource delivery and contribute to Portland's recovery. As we started our time with you today with the actual resolution, and there's a lot there and a lot there that can be left for interpretation. So with this group, we spent some time really thinking about the work that is in front of us and really identifying what is actually in the scope of this work and what's out of scope to ensure that we are spending our energy and focus in the right spaces and recognizing what might not be a part of what we need to do right now. And so what's in scope is green infrastructure, maintenance, and related services, community engagement, equitable access, and education, bureau administration, management, and funding acquisition, and the work initiated and facilitated by one of the 5 bureaus on private property. And what we identified as being out of scope for this work is the Bull Run watershed and privately initiated and facilitated projects on private property. We also spent some time discussing other things that we might need to consider in this process, and maybe that we don't have time to cover in that day, but things that we really need to have some more consideration. And that includes environmental remediation and non-public right-of-way that lies within the natural spaces that you don't own. So now I'm going to pass it back to Dawn to cover the major outcome, which is exploring what is possible with a new approach to natural services delivery.
Thank you, Jamelia. Yeah, so this was really an exciting moment for us as a team to come together and really imagine an integrated framework where we could bring all of our interests together and really have our North Star, and to set the bar high and to make sure that that we are clear about the outcomes that we're desiring. So we were setting our direction, we're committing to an integrated framework, and we also have our sights set on kind of key performance metrics or outcomes that we want to see realized. So we call it our blue sky scenario, because we just really wanted to think outside of the box, to go as kind of big and as inclusive as we could, and really look at all of the opportunities. So I won't read everything on here, and of course you can see we've still got some placeholders for the particular metrics, but the kind of key areas are boldly and comprehensively strengthening our systems of green and blue infrastructure, that this is a once in a generation opportunity to create a system that provides world-class community service and invest in our community in ways that they really care about, in ways that they really see. The next is really delivering on our commitment to provide functional and healthy natural resource delivery that will contribute to Portland's recovery in many different ways. And then also, and perhaps, you know, kind of as the foundation, creating a healthy, clean, ecologically diverse system for wildlife habitat, access to nature, flood storage, and other ecosystem services. So those were kind of the overall overarching goals for us. And then you could see within each of the bubbles that go around the big circle, some metrics that we could see that we're all working towards. So these would be shared metrics that we could all contribute to, which would include a tree canopy, the amount of rain we can infiltrate, the amount of land that is managed in the city for conservation, the number of watersheds restored or waterways restored, and then also our carbon emissions. So looking at tying this into our climate agenda. So these are, you know, it's the beginning of a framework. It's something that really set us in a direction and in a scope that we felt could energize people and signal that this is something that we are really anticipating can make a big difference in the success of charter reform and in the future of Portland. That we have the roots of Portland's identity is in many ways grounded in this work, and we've learned so much the last few years about ways that we've, you know, fallen short and ways that we can do better. And so this really is about setting expectations and getting all 5 bureaus on the same page that acknowledge we can do better and that it's really important work. So I love the emphasis on the, you know, once in a generation opportunity. So that's where we landed after those discussions. And again, it's I mentioned at the beginning when I introduced this, it's, you know, the beginning of a conversation. And so now that we've kind of got alignment, you know, initial draft alignment across the bureaus, now it's time to go to community. It's time to broaden our circles and how to make this richer, how to refine these ideas, how to make sure you know, that we are heading in the right direction. And that we can set these expectations for all of city charter reform, and that it's clear where we're heading. So that's what we have, and
Good.
yeah.
Great. So we, one of the things I didn't mention, because Becky is going to talk a little bit about this, is that we did have the subject matter experts from each of the bureaus, as well as the bureau directors, contribute to the creation of an inventory that was used in developing some of the outcomes that Jamila went over. So in that sense, just wanting folks to know that was, and that also is continuing to inform the process and the opportunities that Becky will describe. But before we go to Becky, are there any questions or comments about the overall project and approach? And then we will get into the more specific opportunities that have been identified as outcomes. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I'll just put 2 on the table. One is in that, I think it was the first or second slide where you showed all the different sort of pieces of the puzzle. Where does kind of the brain live? Because the city has had an amazing kind of group of people historically who really think innovatively outside the box about how you meet multiple mandates, multiple regulations, how you be a leader on these kinds of issues. And I think Portland was historically really an international leader, very, very innovative. I don't think we are anymore, and I didn't see that on the chart. The second question is, there were several things that were either out or potentially out. Bull Run was one of them. Superfund was potentially not part of this. If those aren't part of this, where do they live? Because those are some of the biggest natural resource issues impacted by the city. And I'm not sure why you would put them outside of this process as opposed to part of it. It's kind of like leaving some of the biggest pieces of the puzzle out. And I wonder where they would go if not here.
Thank you. So why don't we address the first question, and I have captured these, where does the brain live? And if you could, am I understanding this correct, is sort of what's driving this process in terms of keeping it on track? And
No, in terms of the different pieces, you have trees, you have natural areas, you have parks, you have all these kinds of pieces of the puzzle. But I think one of the places the city has excelled that is underappreciated is kind of bringing together what was called science, fish, and wildlife at BES, in terms of really thinking, how do we develop really, really innovative, integrated strategies for advancing natural resource protection on an urban landscape.
I'm going to open it up then to the group to answer that particular question. And then we'll go on to the question about, and I think definitely can provide some context on the Bull Run and the Superfund questions.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and quickly say that we have not decided that yet, Bob, and that's why we are hosting these conversations and considering what our options are. We have a number of draft alternatives, I guess, or scenarios that we're considering. And that's what we need feedback on. Where does this live? How do we best organize these resources and grow them and expand them? So how do we build on, that's another, I think, important theme in our work. How do we build on that history and that success? And the kind of the amazing work that has been done in the past? How do we build on that and grow it? So as we move into more detail in the second part of the conversation, and then we're going to, as I said, we have a survey to follow up on. We're going to be asking all of you, what do you think is the best way to organize this in the city, and where should the brain live? That this is for us to weigh in on.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Dawn. The second question then regarding Bull Run and Superfund site. First, the Superfund and those particular issues wasn't out of scope. It was that additional conversation needs to be had about how it's integrated. So really, that's not a decision, even that it's, it's not a decision that is out by any stretch. It's just that it's a different kind of animal, perhaps, in terms of how that's considered. And so that's, as Jamila mentioned, part of additional conversations that need to happen. And is there someone from the Water Bureau who could perhaps provide, I think I see Sarah, there you are, about the Bull Run question?
Sure, thanks, Chris. And hi, Bob Salinger. I haven't seen you in a long time. It's nice to hear your voice. And hello, Pub. I'm Sarah Santner. I'm the relatively new Director of Resource Protection and Planning for the Water Bureau. And so, Dawn, please jump in too on this. But the conversation about whether Bull Run should be part of this happened before I stepped into my new role. So my understanding is that the issues, Bob, as you know, and others know, the issues with Bull Run are often connected to federal issues because the watershed is owned primarily by the U.S. Forest Service. And so the types of coordination and the types of opportunities that exist in the Bull Run are different than what occurs often within the urban landscape. And so the decision to keep Bull Run separate from the conversation was one that was directed by Commissioner Mapps. And so the responsibility for Bull Run watershed remains with the Portland Water Bureau. Of course, as we were, as we progress down the path, we would be learning mutually from each other around shared issues and areas of concern. So, Dawn, do you have anything to add to that? Because you were part of those initial conversations.
Yeah, no, I think you captured that. I think that the regulatory requirements around that was my understanding, is that was what really, and that there are drivers, very specific drivers in and of itself that, make it a separate management.
Good.
Directive.
I think, oh, sorry, Dawn, I didn't mean to speak.
No, I'm good.
So I think I'll go to the next question, but we are tracking these questions. And as Dawn mentioned, there's going to be an opportunity for additional input and feedback. Like, these are not final decisions by any stretch. So going to Karen.
Thank you, Karen Williams, voting pub member. I'd like to go back for a moment to the slide that identified the 4 problem areas and associated opportunities. And I don't mean literally, you don't have to go back to that slide, but I appreciate the efficiency of the delivery of that presentation, but that strikes me as a relatively short list, I guess, of problems and opportunities. And my question, one more concern, and then my question is, concern being that those recognizing that there were many very smart people and subject matter experts that were involved in the workshopping to identify those problems. My concern is that that still might be a bit perhaps insular and have some blind spots to identifying problems, especially those related to community understanding and identifying community needs and expectations. So my question is, when will there be an opportunity for a more holistic look at what others, let's say, what other folks affected by natural resource management think might be the problems?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my question. When will there be other opportunities for problem identification?
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Karen. And that's a great question that I think has been discussed by the group, and even in terms of our follow-up survey with participants, is that there's a desire for that. Is there, Dawn, I see you came off mute. So Dawn, if you'd like to speak to the.
I was just going to say, I think in the survey work that we're in the follow-up work, that's, we're going to see more information from the Eco Northwest work and the analysis. So if you can, I think that the summary that we've provided was a high-level summary from the initial discussions. But when you look at the Eco Northwest report, you're going to see a lot more detail, and then there'll be a follow-up survey. So I think you're going to see more in the Eco Northwest work, and then we're going to have a follow-up survey.
Great, thank you, Dawn. Yeah, good reminder that this was just a high-level process overview. We have not yet gotten into the full report. So if anyone has questions that are very specific along those lines, we might want to hold them. Lorraine, though, please go ahead.
Thank you. So my question specifically, because I've been trying to reconcile this within myself, goes back to ballot measure 26-228, which is creating a whole new city government structure, and that we're moving towards a city administrator, or is it a manager? I keep changing those. I think there's one that is correct and one that is wrong, because they mean different things. And that person will be reporting to the mayor. So as I sit there in that space and I'm hearing what is being presented, and I also attended the meeting that they had this week. I think they had an information meeting. Was it this week or last week? Where they were sharing ideas about what is being done in preparation for 2025. I keep coming back into, and I'm not saying that all the ideas that came up here today are bad ideas or not, but where I'm sitting in is I'm trying to understand if this is a lot of investment in time that will mean nothing when the actual new city government comes into play, a new city administrator or manager, you all need to correct me which one, is hired, and how would this fit into their priority? That is the mayor and whomever is hired. And it even goes back to even the meeting that I attended, where one of the questions that was asked was, what infrastructure is being put in place to accommodate the new structure? Because we're going to be having a lot more commissioners than we currently have. But all I'm hearing is about the structure that will be given to this new body that is being developed between now and then. So that is it's a statement with a question that I'm trying to understand. where all this work fits in to what unknowns, people who haven't been elected yet, a mayor who hasn't been elected yet, a city administrator or manager who hasn't been selected yet or hired yet. How is this aligning with that? And if my question is not clear with my storytelling, please let me know.
I think it's a great question, Lorraine. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm sorry, I'll jump in, and I welcome Adina. Director Adina Long is here with me to have her weigh in on this. But I will say that what we're trying to do is position ourselves to have a really strong argument and proposal on how to best do this. And so I'm feeling, you know, this was a part of what was referred to as a 90-day plan. So we kind of got out ahead of the some of the work plans that were established for the overall charter reform. So we are a few steps ahead of the larger work, and I think that positions us to be really effective in terms of setting expectations, like I said, and getting in at the right time. So that is, I think, of course, we don't know what will happen. I mean, it is, you know, there's still a lot to be determined, and there are a lot of priorities on the table, but we're giving this our best shot to be prepared and to have the legwork done so that we can make a strong proposal. And Adina, I welcome any additional comments you have.
Hi, sorry folks that my video's off. I really don't have anything to add, Dawn. I think you did a really good job of providing a synopsis. I think a phrase that I've heard was that that we are in a position to make some small improvements and some assessments that will deliver a city, government, and organization that will be manageable for a future city administrator. And so I think this is an area that the city has sort of churned about for a while. And so I've actually, and as many of you know, when BES and Parks was under the same oversight but under former Commissioner Nick Fish, we started work to improve our work together, and that work actually continues. So this, to me, is just a sort of a natural extension of that work, and the hope is to sort of deliver some options and some alternatives to doing this work better for the community, to a new city administrator and mayor.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Adina.
Adina.
I'm going to suggest, if possible, because we aren't done with Q&A, we have the opportunity to continue. But since we haven't had the full report yet from Eco Northwest, there's some context that we may not yet have for that discussion. So I know, Bob, you have spoken before. Julia DeGraw and Heather Day Melgar, would you be willing to hold your questions for the moment so we can get the presentation from Becky, and then we'll come back into Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your patience because we want to get back to these. These are very important questions that are coming up, and want to be able to circle back to them at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Steckler, who's going to present from Eco Northwest and give the perspective of her team and how they came into this process. And then we'll do more Q&A after.
Thank you so much, Chris. And so I am thrilled to be here. My name is Becky Steckler, and I'm a project director at Eco Northwest. I have about a 25-year history of working on the West Coast and on topics across the country for both public, private, and nonprofit organizations, as well as most recently, I spent 5 years as the program director for the Urbanism Next Center at the University of Oregon. So I just recently rejoined Echo Northwest, and I worked with my colleague Mary Chase on this inventory and assessment, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about. We've talked about the resolution and the 5 bureaus. And basically, Echo Northwest looked at 141 documents. And so these documents were really compiled by the Bureau subject matter experts, and they were really to help to illustrate the areas of overlap or coordination, how funding is flowing in different ways. Really just to kind of illustrate not everything the bureaus do, but where that coordination and additional work has been necessary in the past. And while the resolution identified 5 kind of topic areas, once we started going through this documentation, it seemed like there was 9 topics that we could put most of the documents and categorize them. And so related to access to nature, environmental education, stewardship and community gardens, climate resilience, environmental planning and policy, fish and wildlife, green stormwater infrastructure, natural areas, remediation, urban tree canopy, and vegetation. I'm going to talk some more about that. So what Echo Northwest did is we did a rapid scan. We quantified and just described what we found in this inventory, the different types of documents, and just looking at the funding flows. And basically, we were trying to identify, just based on the inventory, where could natural resource service delivery potentially improve. And then also we did looked a little bit at, what does improvement mean? So what does some of the best practices literature tell us about that? And so we developed a discussion draft. So that was really kind of a first draft of the inventory and assessment, which we gave to the 5 bureaus at the end of June. And that was really in preparation for a conversation we had with the 5 bureau directors, as well as their subject matter experts. And then we have the final inventory assessment report. We're just waiting for one additional piece of information, and then we will be sending that on, and it will be final. So I just want to say too, this is definitely one step of a much more complex process. And imagine if a couple that's been married for 50 years said, we've been living together for a long time and we want to remodel our house, and the only additional information they gave you were the floor plans. So really, this is just a small kind of squint into it's a limited view of the challenges and really opportunities that are presented to the city as part of this process. So like I said, it doesn't represent all of the work that the bureaus do, but it definitely was an opportunity to highlight just those places where the decisions and planning is the most complex. And really, even as we categorize these things, so many of them really naturally fit into multiple kind of topic areas. And so we tried to categorize them in the categories that really seem to make the most sense. So just to get a sense of, where did these different documents lie? So that first column there really just shows you how many documents we were able to put into these different categories. Definitely environmental planning and policy was right at the top, along with documentation related to natural areas. And then the 5 columns that really show by bureau, you can see that there's overlap. So there's a number of documents, and that was really kind of the element of this, that different bureaus were really coordinating with each other. So it was related to multiple ones. And so to get a sense of what that looks like, you can see that BES and Parks and Recreation had the highest number of documentation related to at least each other. But then also they're working a lot with PBOT and the Water Bureau and the Planning and Sustainability Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. So it's a complex web, which I think this probably shows pretty well. And then also just thinking about how to categorize these related to the type of documentation that we were reviewing. So again, almost half of them were related to agreements between different bureaus and outside organizations as well on how they were going to be coordinating on different types of activities. But then also specifically on programs, regulations, and those external partnerships kind of round up some of the top, I think it's either 4 or 5. So, and to get a sense of how funding is flowing, we looked also at from which bureaus were paying for which types of kind of those in those different topic areas. And again, just to emphasize, this is not the complete budget for these different bureaus, but really just what was represented in the inventory to kind of give you a sense of scale. You know, what is the city of Portland currently spending on these systems just within the documentation that we had. And then to visualize the flow between different bureaus for these activities, it just shows again that BES, that much of the inventory funding that was identified is flowing to Parks and Recreation, but also to community partners, to some consultants and contractors, and then the other bureaus. Just going to pause here for a second because I know these are interesting graphics. And so next, I'm going to talk about 4 of the topic areas where I would say that there was a lot of documentation and information about coordination. And then I've got a summary for the other 5. And climate resilience is one. I wouldn't say that there was a high amount of documentation, but it definitely is one of those areas where looking into the future, it was anticipated that this is definitely an area where there's going to be just increased emphasis and opportunity to work together. Kind of separate from this project, and definitely related to the work that I'm doing in other policy areas. It seems like it is a very common question to ask, kind of regardless of what the policy question is, what are the equity implications of these things that we're considering? And then what are the greenhouse gas implications? What are the climate implications? And so thinking forward and also looking at the opportunity from the Portland Clean Energy Fund and that roughly $750 million that fund will be paying out over the next roughly 5 years, there's definitely some overlap for all of the bureaus and potential funding sources for continued work. And so we definitely wanted to highlight that here, and specifically, called into some of the priority areas that are listed here. That green infrastructure and urban tree canopy is definitely one of those topics that has been identified, and that funding is going to start going towards. Another area was the green stormwater infrastructure. And so here, BES is definitely the lead, and they have a number of coordinating efforts and agreements that really center around compliance with federal, state, and then local regulations. And so this is definitely kind of a complex to make sure that we're in compliance around a wide variety of activities, and the funding for these are also pretty complicated as well. Often touch on a variety of different things. So you can see just a few of the documents or different kinds of programs that were documented in the inventory itself, and the different coordination with different bureaus. So there's definitely a lot going on here. Natural areas is also another area, and this was kind of not a loose, but this was kind of an all-encompassing area that we were looking at. And again, the amount of detail in some of the documentation that was in this particular area, from identifying who are the people and how often will they meet and what kind of reporting requirements will there be. It was just, some of these documents were very, very detailed in how the bureaus were going to be working together. And of course, it's not just within the city itself, but also there's coordination efforts with outside organizations like Metro, as well as with other jurisdictions, the counties, the state, and nonprofits or other organizations, private and public. Just making sure I've got it all. Related to urban tree canopy, and again, this was definitely one area where I think just almost all of the bureaus are working together. And Portland Parks and Recreation often takes a lead in this, especially in the operations and maintenance of trees across the city. And so they have a number of agreements with BES and the Bureau of Transportation, the Water Bureau, in the ensuring that the tree standards in Title 11 are followed, as well as just maintaining that inventory of trees, and then also doing the maintenance of the trees themselves. And they also are thinking about who's planting trees in different areas around the city. So this is definitely another area where there was pretty complex agreements and organizations between the different bureaus. And then, as I mentioned at the very beginning, there were the other 5 areas: the access to nature, environmental education, stewardship, and community gardens. And just looking at the documents that were in the inventory, and we definitely recognize it's probably not the full universe of coordination that happens in all its different permutations. But still, even within the inventory itself, there's quite a lot of documentation with working with both the public as well as other organizations. And I think here what we found also kind of resonates with some of the findings from the first workshop related to, how can Portland do a better job of making it easy to understand who to contact at the city to address any kind of public needs, as well as just working with nonprofit organizations that often have limited resources. And so making it easy to communicate, and also thinking about, how can you improve just public coordination, and looking for opportunities potentially for increasing grants or other kinds of funding, so that it makes it easier for those groups to participate as well. Around environmental planning and policy, there were quite a few documents that were definitely demonstrated the compliance with regulations. And NBPS was the lead in many of those, thinking about how development happens or doesn't happen, or helps to protect natural areas and natural services throughout the city. Related to fish and wildlife, there was a number of plans there as well. And we also categorized some of the work related to floodplain management in that it was helping to comply with Endangered Species Act and other types of regulations. We also looked at, there was a number of documents around remediation. And so we have a section on that. And then vegetation, just looking at the management of invasive species, or my words are escaping me, reinvigorating, replanting native species, and doing that kind of rehabilitation, and then other kinds of horticultural services. So looking at the opportunities, the thing that we always kept in mind as well is, where are the opportunities for greater efficiency in delivery? So can we help to reduce costs? Can we reduce the staff effort? Can we make things, are there opportunities to provide services in a shorter period of time? So can we make the service delivery more efficient? Can we make it more equitable, so that populations that have been historically underserved can actually benefit from the investments that we're making through public service? So where are those opportunities there? And then finally, can we not provide more efficient service, but it's not good? Can we actually make that service a higher quality? So can we improve the ecological services and think about those social benefits? And really think about, can we make the city more resilient to climate change? And kind of to reiterate some of even the questions I've heard about the process so far, that I've got both considerations here that make this all pretty complex, and then next steps at the end. And so I'm just going to quickly go through those. I think we've already touched on, there are a number of, of federal, state, regional, and local regulations or guidance that the city of Portland either has to or is trying to comply with, and different bureaus are responsible for different things. And so that just makes it complex to think through how can we do this more efficiently and make sure that we're also complying with everything we need to comply with. Sometimes funding and finance is tied very directly to specific types of activities. And so that makes it more complicated as well to make sure we have the financial resources to do the work that needs to be done. As I've mentioned, climate resilience is kind of top of mind and is being integrated in a more substantive way through all of the work that that the bureaus are doing. And there's additional kind of opportunities, especially through the climate emergency plan that the city of Portland is both doing right now and plans to do in the future. The impact of houselessness on natural areas is definitely documented. And I think probably a lot of people here understand what that is. The group that we were talking to also recognized that there are other bureaus that have to succeed before you can really do the recovery in natural areas and ensure that folks won't come back in and continue to camp in our natural areas, that it's definitely a whole city approach. But there will be opportunities there as well. Just quickly, technology, there's also opportunities to improve service delivery through technology, but that's something else that would need to be researched. And definitely the need for coordination, even if the service delivery is improved and made more efficient, that coordination among other organizational units within the city will be, it's probably never going to go away, and it will still be there and will need to be considered. So we identified 5 opportunities, and they're organized kind of from the least to the most organizational change. And really, this is kind of a menu of options, and nothing should be seen as mutually exclusive. It might be kind of a, pick different options from each one. And when I say organizational units, it's kind of that neutral language, because we don't really know what the charter reform process is going to deliver. Will there continue to be bureaus? Will there be departments? Organizational unit is that just neutral language to say it could be whatever it is, that this is potentially how it could be organized. And so the first one is there is the potential just to keep the current organizational structure. But even if the city does that, there's still the opportunity to increase equity and make that consistent with the city of Portland's core values. And so even as we were looking through the documentation, there were a number of areas, and this is probably just a short list, and there's probably a longer list that could be made. But as the city is thinking about the floodplain management, urban tree canopy, access to nature, remediation, and houselessness in natural areas, these are important areas to consider. What are the equity implications, and how can we improve service to have more equitable outcomes? And again, thinking about those equity outcomes, the opportunities could include additional interbureau engagement, and thinking about how you engage with different populations and different organizations. Again, thinking about, are there opportunities for compensation to organizations to improve participation? Messaging and communication, can the city do a better job among the different bureaus on how they communicate both with the public and organizations themselves, to just make it easier for people to understand what's going on, and then being consistent in this interaction with the public and other organizations. The second opportunity was consolidating equitable delivery of natural area services into one organizational unit. And so this is thinking about the planning, acquisition, development, operations, and maintenance of designated natural areas, including the built-in infrastructure such as trails and bridges, parking, trash receptacles, and gates, as well as green infrastructure such as vegetation. Really focusing on ecological restoration, including flood storage and floodplain reconnection projects, and of course thinking about the education, outreach, education, stewardship, and partnerships with external organizations and individuals. Opportunity 3 was consolidating the equitable delivery of green stormwater infrastructure. And so again, thinking about the planning, design, construction, operations and maintenance, and emergency response for green stormwater facilities. And also the education, outreach, education, and partnerships related to green stormwater infrastructure. Opportunity 4 is consolidating equitable delivery of urban tree canopy services into one organizational unit. And so thinking about the tree planning, maintenance, emergency response, and contracted services, everything related to the Title 11, and again, consolidating that outreach and education and partnerships related to urban tree canopy. And then the 5th one is putting it all together. And this is basically creating one natural resources organizational unit. So putting all of these topics and public services into one organization, and given kind of the scale of this, probably it would be wise to consider what phasing would look like, because this would be definitely the most complex opportunity. And so regardless of what is done, the city definitely should be taking some additional next steps. And so thinking about once there's been some at least preliminary decisions about a direction, understanding, and maybe this gets back to Bob's question about innovation, but what are some of the best practices research? What is working well in other locations, and what might be applicable here for the city of Portland? Really thinking through who's responsible for what are the different roles, the systems and processes. Again, making sure that we're thinking about equitable natural resource service delivery, and considering those different populations. Really thinking through, this is going to affect a lot of different people and organizations. So making sure that there's additional public and stakeholder engagement. As I said, no matter what, it's going to take additional coordination among other city bureaus or organizational units, as well as coordinating with the other external partners, be it surrounding cities, the counties, metro, the state, and other public and nonprofit academic organizations that the city works with. And finally, making sure that the resources, the financial resources are available to be able to change with the organization. And then finally, just considering, are there additional technology upgrades that can help with this? And I'll leave it there. And I think, Chris, I'm available for questions.
Yes, thank you, Becky. And maybe we will leave this slide up. And because there's a lot more information in these, we may go back to slides if people have specific questions. So yeah, let's start with some questions. If we could, let's focus on start with some clarity questions for Becky. Because this was a lot of information. Let's start with those, and then we may have broader questions that will include more of the Bureau participants that are here in the meeting. So any clarifying questions first for Becky on the work that Eco Northwest did? Karen Williams.
Thanks. My clarifying question is around the slide that was entitled Best Practices Opportunities. And there were 3 areas identified, which I've summarized in my notes as efficiency, equity, and effectiveness. Could you say more, Becky, about how, okay, so again, that seems like kind of a short list. And I always have a bit of queasiness on efficiency being identified as, I guess, without a whole lot of examination, a good thing and something to be aiming for. So that's just the context for my question. I think my clarifying question is, Could you say more about how those 3 areas were identified as best practices to be worked towards?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I would definitely say it was just a very general, excuse me, a review, excuse me. A general review of some best practices for policy in general. And I think I absolutely agree. And I, if I recall correctly, there was a quote, you know, you can get much more efficient at delivering bad policy. And so I would definitely say that there's some balancing there, but it felt important to at least put some, not exactly guardrails, but some, like, when we say improved service delivery, to be clear about what that is. And this is just some of what the literature suggests. But I think for this particular activity that the city is doing, that there is probably a need for the city to determine, you know, what constitutes improved service delivery for the city of Portland. And especially for natural resource service delivery specifically. So, you know, and at what level does it make sense to, you know, this takes a lot of work. And so at what level do you say this amount of effort is worth the benefits that we're hoping to achieve by doing this? So I would say it's more of a jumping off point than it's definitely not the definitive end all be all.
Thank you, Bob Salinger.
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I'm glad you put it in the chat, because there's a lot in there. So I have a lot of questions. I need to go back and really read it to understand it. But you know, just showing my cards on this. I like the 5th one the best. I think it's the only way that the city gets back on track on natural resources. And I think it's way off track at this point. And I think unless it's consolidated and really given its own unit and heightened, it's going to continue to deteriorate and become more fragmented. But a couple of questions. If you create your own natural organizational unit, you know, how much have you dug down into funding? Do the funding sources from BES move with that unit? Because that is the core funding for a lot of natural resources. And secondly, I just want to understand, you keep talking about, you know, natural resources delivery, and I'm not exactly sure how you're defining that. I was looking for something that said, improve natural resources outcomes, or achieve a healthy environment. I worry a little bit too much that this is very utilitarian in the way it reads to me, but maybe that's just my bias. But I'm looking for something that really starts to get at, you know, how do we, for example, not only meet regulatory compliance under the Endangered Species Act, but also help with salmon recovery, something the city committed to back in 2000. It's no longer doing that, by the way. It's not even close to doing that. How do we really start to develop proactive climate change strategies, as opposed to ignoring them or doing the bare minimum, which I think is where we're at right now. So I'm just looking for something in there, and maybe you're trying to get at it with the terminology you're using around improved environmental outcomes.
Absolutely. I'll just say briefly, it's kind of, you know, part of the limitation is that Echo Northwest definitely did what is, you know, a relatively quick scan of the documentation that was put in the inventory. And so these aren't even necessarily recommendations, but places where we identified opportunities to improve that, you know, the service delivery. And so I guess I would turn to Dawn and Adina to say, you know, how do you really then define what that means and those next steps?
Yeah, I'm sensitive to time, so I'm going to try to just very quickly say, I mean, I think this presentation is, in two parts. One was the part of the leaders, some of the leaders and some of the subject matter experts putting their best thinking together and kind of aligning their hearts and minds in terms of the direction that we want to go and the intention and potential that we see. And then the second part was just doing this inventory of all the existing documents and flow of money. We haven't quite put this into a complete package yet. And again, we're kind of working against the clock to line up and get our story straight in time for the larger city charter reform discussions. So I feel like we like when it comes to the terminology, there's a lot of room for improvement. And although it was just that blue sky diagram that we showed, even though it was just the beginning of a vision, that was our setting our intention that we want to have that kind of a framework to hold ourselves accountable to. So I think, Bob, you're asking good questions, and it's just that we're just reflecting to you the work that we've done so far, and the schedule that we're working within. And these questions are exactly what we need to inform our recommendations moving forward.
Thank you, Dawn. Julia DeGraw.
Yeah, I can make my comment pretty quick, just because it's somewhat similar to what Bob was saying, but I just kind of wanted to second my thoughts on feeling that number 5 does also feel like the direction we need to go in order to be not just proactive and innovative, but also I think to be to have a chance at being more effective at all the comprehensive areas that Portland needs to be covering in the natural resources arena. And I also felt very similarly about the natural resources delivery language. I just kind of felt that I wanted to make sure that we're thinking holistically from a natural an environmental perspective as well, because the benefits to the public and to public health for having positive environmental outcomes are really immense and maybe not as direct as like a measurable service, if you will, so and that might just again be semantics, but so what I'm saying is kind of repetitive, but I do feel like knowing that there's another perspective that's similar is helpful as well. And I guess actually I will second also, Karen was speaking my mind as well about this wanting to make sure that there are opportunities baked into this process for public input, like substantial public input, not just this is mostly baked, what do you think? Because there's so much knowledge within our communities that we just don't, in wisdom, that we don't necessarily, you don't know what you don't know, and you won't find out if you don't ask. So I am kind of hoping that there is a process, given the timeline, I still am hoping that there is a process where there can be substantive input from communities, because you will always find really important input when you seek it out.
Thank you so much, Julia. Karen.
Thanks for opportunity for one more clarifying question. And this has to do with the methodology. So I hear the focus on funding streams and documentations as the review of those two fundamental areas being what informed the, not recommendations, but the opportunities. And I am, again, just, showing my cards, right? Concerned about what I'm hearing. I guess I'm just sensing urgency, kind of leading to expediency. So what I'm getting at is funding streams and documentation are sort of readily accessible information. So my clarifying question is, what other potential sources of information would you have liked to have used if you had had more time? I think that's what I'm getting at. What do you think would have been valuable to look at to inform some of your opportunity summaries?
Thank you, Karen. That's an excellent question, and I think open that to not just Becky answering as the consultant, but also from the Bureau teams to speak to what other potential sources of information and input would you have liked to receive?
Yeah, I'll just start and say that there were definitely constraints on time, and ideally, it would have been great to actually talk to the people that were creating these agreements and other documentation to better understand how it came up in the first place and really understanding those problems it was trying to solve. I think that kind of context would have been helpful, and it's definitely a lot of that context lives within the bureaus themselves, as well as the people and organizations such as PUB and others that have been working on, natural resource topics for many, many years. And so, and it's not to say that I think that's part of the next part of the process. And definitely, like I said, a lot of that knowledge lives with a wide variety of people that are still involved in this process. So this was definitely one of many steps that are happening as part of this, and definitely I'll pass it over the bureaus and the other staff have a better sense of what's happening as part of this process.
Hi, this is Adina Long, Director of Portland Parks and Recreation. I just want to clarify that there's been some insinuation like the lack of time, the quick turnover. That was based on a resolution and a directive to create an action plan. And so while these opportunities will be shared with the Chief Administrative Officer and others on the transition team, there is no imminent deadline on a decision. So I think that's kind of important to put out there. And we clearly, we very much recognize that there's a lot of deep diving and investigation and vetting and engagement that needs to be done regardless of how we move forward. So yes, there is a short timeline in a way, but I guess I just want to reassure folks who have expressed an interest in and a concern about what we have not included or considered, that the door isn't closing. So I just wanted to say that, and I hope that's helpful and reassuring.
Thank you, Adina. I think that's very helpful. And I see Alexis, Rife, you have your hand up. And then Amy, I do want to check in with you on our time after this question.
Yeah, thank you. I think actually some of my comment has just been addressed. So thank you for that, because I had similar comments to some of my other fellow board members. One is on the terminology around delivery. I think can stand to be clarified what we mean by that. And then my question was around the timeline and the next steps, because I read this as an action plan. And so then how are you interpreting what it means to be an action plan? Is it a recommendation for these opportunities? Is it a set of actions to take to ensure that there's sufficient community insight, that we're identifying the gaps? Similarly to Karen, I was like, what gaps are we blind to as we go through existing documents and existing funding sources? And I think that engagement with the community can help us identify what those other questions or needs are that that have not emerged through the review of existing documentation. And so just encourage that the action plan be including some of those activities as we move forward. But thank you for the presentation and the conversation. It's been very insightful.
And Adina, I don't know if you wanted to go into that. I wouldn't say it was, this definitely was, looking at those opportunities based on what we saw in the inventory and acknowledging that there's a number of additional steps that would need to be done. And I guess I would reiterate what I heard from Director Long, that, while Echo Northwest had, a specific amount of time to review the inventory, and I think it was really to give, to be able to present the information so that other steps could be taken. And so it's really going to be up to the city and others to decide, what are the additional activities that happen. And I don't know if any of either the directors wanted to address that anymore.
Thank you, Becky. That's really perfect context and actually timely. I think I was going to throw it over to either of the directors that are here to describe the next steps for this process and what you can expect going forward.
Had to find my unmute. Thank you, Chris and Adina. Again, tune me up and please fill in what I miss. But we have a survey that we want to send to our stakeholders. Adina is going to be presenting. Adina and Chris and Becky will be presenting to the Parks Board and to the Urban Forestry Commission. And then we also have a meeting with our own staff and leadership teams of our respective bureaus. So this month is a month of outreach and reporting on the work that we've done. And we're going to have a survey that will go out to the folks that we're presenting to, and like to get your feedback. And then we plan on bringing that together and being able to make a recommendation for a work plan, not a recommendation for a final configuration or a final decision, but a work plan that will get us to that final configuration. I do think we want to offer a clear signal about the direction that we're heading. And I can tell you right now, so first of all, you're the first group that we've met with publicly. So know that you're hearing, you're the first folks that are hearing a report on the work that we've done. And I'll tell you as a bit of a, I guess, sneak peek that I would say probably most of the project team is not interested in the status quo. We know that we could do a little bit better in the status quo, or a lot better in the status quo, but that's really not what we're aiming for. So which other pieces we take and how do we get to an overall the best configuration of bringing these resources together has not yet been determined, and we need to think about it in the context of creating a public works group, perhaps. But I think what we aim to do is to gather your feedback and then be able to turn to city leaders, including the elected officials, and send a strong signal about the scope and the scale of the work that we need to do. But ultimately, what we have to provide is a work plan for next steps. So we've got a survey, collecting the data, sending a signal to city leaders, both the elected officials and the chief administrative officer, and then I would see another year of analysis and getting us ready for January 2025. And Adina, please, anything I've left out?
You didn't leave anything out, but I did want to just make one clarification. Before, when I mentioned the action plan, that's the language, the verbiage that was included in the resolution, not language that we've adopted. And frankly, I see this work as the action plan. So I just wanted to clarify that for folks who had questions about that particular language. we are not intending to submit a proposed action plan, but rather the work that we've been doing and will continue to do to get to this final preferred future state. That's the work that we're referring to. So
yeah, that's a
thank you.
really important clarification, Adina. Thank you. And if you think about it, like in change management language, we've got a current state, we're going to agree on a future state, and then we'll have a roadmap, which will be this work plan to get to that desired future state.
Hey, thank you all. Just sorry, this is Robin, the chair. Just needed to jump in to make sure it looks like we're actually coming to an end of our time together. So I just wanted to, is Chris or any of the presenters available? Is there any follow-up information that we should be sending to you? If we have questions, would you like us just to push them to Amy? I just want to make, I think Lorraine might have a question, but I just wasn't sure if we had enough time to finish it today. Amy, are you out there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Robin. Yes, if there are questions from the board, certainly send them my way. It sounds like there'll be further opportunities in the future with the survey and other items. So I'll certainly be sending that information out to the board as it becomes available. But in the interim, if there's specific questions, I will compile those and I can share them with the Bureau staff and identify whether there's any information that could be provided to respond to questions in the interim. And we probably just have a couple quick final items before we leave. So if people can hold on for just a couple minutes. Lorraine, are you okay holding your question and talking with me after the meeting so that I can capture it and share it with the folks?
It's just 2 quick words, and I will share it, that this is, and I'm hearing it from the rest of the board members. I think this is what preparing a table and asking people to come eat what you've prepared looks like. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, so I think if Shayna, if you have anything that you wanted to add, I would just give you a minute if you wanted to jump in, but definitely look for a follow-up communication from us with some supporting information and instructions on the survey and some more detail on the schedule when we have some more specific dates.
The only thing I'd add is if you do have additional questions that you receive, feel free to send them to me and I will make sure to get a response to them.
Okay, and all the pub questions go through Amy, and so Amy can collect them and get them to you, Shayna.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
And
all right,
yeah,
thanks everyone. Really appreciate everyone's time.
And thank you all for joining us. And then looks like we just have a little bit of information just going on for our next pub meeting. We had a filtration plant update planned for this one, but we definitely used our time wisely. And so it's important that we didn't push that into the end of this meeting. So we've got some annual report and budget work to think about for the next one. And then, yeah, this screen just has a couple ideas of what we can do with the first September meeting as well, just to stay on track and make sure that we're always engaging in the budget, even during the off seasons.
So just a reminder to members that if you have questions and follow-up that is desired related to the filtration plant information that I sent out to you, please send those my way, either by email or give me a call. I'm happy to chat with you and capture your questions so that we can identify whether to dedicate some agenda time to that topic on the upcoming meetings, or to prioritize some of the other items on your work plan and some of the time-sensitive things that are coming up this next month. So look for, I'll send out another reminder after this meeting with the links and all the information that I sent before, but certainly reach out to me if you have any questions or follow-up. I think that's it.
Thank you.
We'll stop the recording.